Good morning and welcome to World News here on TVP World. My name is Diana Skaya. And we begin this morning with the escalating political crisis in Turkey as protests continue. Now, Sunday night, tens of thousands of protesters took part in demonstrations across the country. Ekrem Imamoglu, the main rival of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, was arrested. In response to the unrest, police used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. Now, Sunday night saw ramping up of the largest protest Turkey has seen in more than a decade. Crowds gathered near Istanbul's city hall for the fifth night in a row, waving Turkish flags and chanting in front of a row of riot police. Officers could be seen firing water cannons at some of the protesters and using pepper spray. Rallies took place in at least 55 out of Turkey's 81 provinces, or in more than two-thirds of the country. Now, in response, President Erdogan condemned the demonstrations and accused the opposition Republican People's Party of disturbing the peace and polarizing Turkish society. Now, Erdogan is due to hold a meeting with his cabinet of ministers, where he is expected to comment on the ongoing demonstrations. The protests began after Ekrem Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul, and Erdogan's main political rival, was detained and then formally arrested on charges of corruption. The same week, he was poised to be selected as the Republican Party's presidential nominee. A pivotal moment for Ukraine-Russia peace talks, or yet another round of stalled negotiations. On Monday, the United States and Russia will hold direct talks on the ongoing war in Ukraine. And this comes after U.S. and Ukrainian delegations met in Saudi Arabia on Sunday to discuss the partial ceasefire on energy and critical infrastructure strikes. Our Kyiv correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, has more.
US President Donald Trump says efforts to stop escalations between Russia and Ukraine are somewhat under control. This comes as a Ukrainian delegation met with a US delegation in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, ahead of further talks which will include Russia on Monday. Now, Rustem Umerov, Ukraine's defense secretary, had this to say about those talks. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We have concluded our meeting with the American team. The discussion was productive and focused. We addressed key points, including energy. President Volodymyr Zelensky's goal is to secure a just and lasting peace for our country and our people, and by extension for all of Europe. We are working to make that goal a reality.
So that was the view from the Ukrainian government. Now, on the US side, the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who seems to have taken over from Keith Kellogg, the Special Envoy to Ukraine and Russia, as the chief negotiator of these talks between the US and Russia, he gave an interview in which he discussed the way the US sees these discussions and how they are developing with Russia. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I feel that he wants peace. The president had two very productive calls this week, or last week, I should say, one with President Zelensky, one with President Putin. I sat and listened to both of them. In both conversations, it was all about a lasting peace. Lots of progress got made last week. Now, I've been asked my opinion. So about what President Putin's motives are on a larger scale. And I simply have said that I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe.
So Steve Witkoff there certainly seems to place a lot of hope that Vladimir Putin can be trusted to stick to his word in any negotiations with the United States. Now, the Ukrainian government will have a very different perspective on Putin and how he can be trusted to respect to internationally binding agreements, ones that he has signed with Ukraine, he has repeatedly violated. So if the US is hoping that they can achieve a quick ceasefire and that Putin can be expected to stick to those terms, the Ukrainians certainly don't see it the same way, even if they are certainly putting forward a very hopeful posture on these talks. It's Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
And staying on Ukraine, Russia launched yet another attack on the war-torn country Sunday night, targeting the Kyiv region. One person was wounded. A 37-year-old man suffered serious injuries and was taken to the hospital. Now, the Russian strike also damaged 2 houses and ignited a fire at a commercial enterprise. Last night's bombardment follows a massive drone attack on the region on Saturday night, which left 3 people killed and 10 others injured. China is considering joining a potential peacekeeping force to secure a ceasefire in Ukraine. However, experts believe Beijing is tactically supporting Russia.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has introduced the idea of forming a European-led coalition of the willing. It is aimed to support Ukraine against Russian aggression and, once it's in place, enforce a ceasefire between Kyiv and Moscow by allied EU and NATO members. The German newspaper Die Welt has reported that Beijing is exploring Europe's openness to Chinese participation in this initiative. The inclusion of China could increase Russia's acceptance of peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. However, according to the Warsaw-based Center for Eastern Studies, China has little interest in negotiating an end to the conflict.
The German Conservative Alliance of the Christian Democratic Union and Christian Social Union, along with the Social Democratic SPD party, will report on the progress of talks on a coalition government. Both sides of the negotiations aim to form a new cabinet, however, only after they overcome disagreements on issues related to migration, the budget, and welfare policies. The prospective chancellor and head of the CDU, Friedrich Merz, is under pressure from inside his own party to secure traditional right-wing policies, which so far have been a stumbling block of the coalition talks. Particularly, Merz must focus on issues of migration and cuts to the welfare budget. He is also under pressure to deliver on his campaign promises, which include migration and cuts to social spending, which in a recent interview he called, quote, the greatest sticking points. In the weeks preceding the election, Merz turned increasingly tough on migration in a bid to win back voters who would move towards the far-right Alternative for Germany. Merz promised to introduce strict border controls and reject all irregular entries, including asylum seekers. His possible coalition partners, the SPD, argue that the change would violate EU law, anger Germany's neighbors, and undermine European security. We're bound to hear more about the coalition talks on Tuesday during the upcoming session of the German parliament. Hungary remains a roadblock on Ukraine's path to the European Union, with Budapest citing concerns over minority rights as its primary justification. Now, as tensions simmer between the two neighbors, the issue has become another flashpoint in Hungary's increasingly strained relationship with Brussels.
Hungary's foreign minister once again opposed Ukraine's bid for European Union membership. Peter Szijjártó argues that Kyiv's alleged curbing of the rights of Hungarians in the Ukrainian region of Transcarpathia is a deal-breaker.
Despite the promises, Ukraine still hasn't restored the Hungarian minority rights taken away in 2015. Until that changes, there can be no progress on EU accession, as Kyiv's minority policy remains unacceptable.
In 2017, Ukraine made the Ukrainian language mandatory in public schools. While aimed at bolstering national identity, the development raised some concerns over minority language protections, including Hungarian. However, Kyiv promptly met with Budapest to reconcile the situation.
They made an agreement, but later on Budapest stepped back from that, because in that way they can still use as a pretext that case to block any movement which makes Ukraine closer to EU.
Most recently, EU leaders rejected Vladimir Putin's request to halt military aid to Ukraine as part of the ongoing ceasefire negotiations. All except one, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
It's simply anti-European when one person blocks decisions that are important for the entire continent or that have already been agreed upon.
Frictions in Transcarpathia worsened when Orban's government gave passports to the ethnic Hungarian community in the region, despite Kyiv's ban on dual citizenship. In 2018, the Hungarian consul toasted new passport holders, saying, quote, "Don't tell the Ukrainian authorities."
So the Hungarian government unfortunately used the Hungarian minority case to block any Ukrainian initiative, and Hungary became the Trojan horse of Putin in the EU.
Although Hungary did not endorse military support for Ukraine at the Brussels Emergency Summit, the leaders of the remaining 26 EU countries published their own conclusions independently of Hungary. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
The Israeli military continues to carry out air and ground operations in the Gaza Strip. On Sunday night, an Israeli airstrike hit a hospital in southern Gaza, leaving part of the building in flames and causing multiple casualties. According to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza, Sunday's attacks resulted in 41 deaths. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed it carried out a strike on a, quote, key terrorist in the Hamas terrorist organization. According to the IDF, the man was operating from inside the hospital. However, Israeli authorities did not share the target's identity. Additionally, on Sunday, the Israeli military said that IDF troops concluded the encirclement of the Tel al-Sultan district in West Rafah. According to Israeli officials, the purpose of the operation was to reinforce control and expand the security zone into southern parts of the Gaza Strip. After much anticipation, it's now official. Canada will hold snap elections on April 28th. On Sunday, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, called for the dissolution of Parliament and announced a general election. Now, Carney, who took over the Prime Minister's post from Justin Trudeau less than 2 weeks ago, will campaign for the Liberal Party. Now, during his speech outside Rideau Hall, he told Canadians that Trump's tariffs were, quote, the most significant threat of our lifetime. He also called for a mandate to deal with Donald Trump and the threat that his tariffs pose to Canada. Now, Carney's main rival is Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, known for a more confrontational approach to politics, similar to that of Donald Trump. And moving on to sports. Monday night, Poland will face Malta in the Football World Cup qualifiers. Now, Robert Lewandowski's team has a shot at redemption after Friday's game against Lithuania, which was won by the Poles 1-0, albeit in a very underwhelming fashion that disappointed many fans. Now, Poland is seen as a favorite against Malta, but apart from a favorable result, many fans wish to see a more offensive style of play. The Polish national team is in a group together with Lithuania, Malta, Finland, and following yesterday's UEFA Nations League quarterfinal, they were joined by the star-studded Netherlands. Only one of these teams can qualify directly to the 2026 World Cup in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The runners-up will have to go to the playoffs to win a spot at the tournament. And with that, we end this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching. Up next, World Talks.